The diner sat along a quiet road where trucks passed more often than cars. Its lights stayed on long after most places nearby had closed. Inside, the smell of coffee and fried food mixed with the low hum of an old refrigerator. It was not a place people came to impress anyone. It was a place people came when they were tired, hungry, or alone. The waitress had been on her feet since early morning. Her shoes pressed hard against the floor, and her back ached in a dull, familiar way. She had worked this diner for years, long enough to know the sound of every creak and the rhythm of every night. She wiped the counter slowly, watching the clock above the kitchen door. Another hour, maybe less, and her shift would finally end. There were only a few customers left. A truck driver sat near the window, scrolling through his phone while sipping coffee that had gone cold. An older couple shared a plate of fries, speaking in quiet voices. And then there was the man in the corner booth. He had come in alone about 20 minutes earlier. He wore a simple dark jacket and clean shoes, nothing flashy, nothing that drew attention. He didn't look rich or poor, just calm. He ordered a basic meal and thanked her politely when she set the plate down. That small detail stood out to her. Not many people said thank you anymore, especially late at night. She noticed he barely touched his phone. Instead, he looked around the diner as if taking everything in. The faded menu on the wall, the chipped edge of the counter, the small plant near the register that someone had forgotten to water. His eyes held a tired look, not sleepy, but heavy, like someone carrying more than just a long day. She didn't know it then, but he had chosen this place on purpose. He traveled often, moving from city to city, meeting people who wanted something from him. This diner was different. No one recognized him here. No one stared. For once, he could sit quietly and just eat. The waitress poured herself a small cup of coffee behind the counter. She leaned back slightly, letting the warmth steady her. Nights like this were usually slow and peaceful. She liked that. It gave her time to think. About bills waiting at home. About how long she could keep working these hours. About the small dream she carried but rarely spoke out loud. The bell above the door rang softly as someone stepped outside. She glanced up without much interest. It was common for people to go in and out, especially truck drivers stretching their legs. But something about the movement outside the window made her pause. Two figures stood near the side of the building, talking in low voices. She told herself not to overthink it. Late nights always made shadows feel bigger than they were. She returned to wiping the counter, though her eyes flicked back toward the window once more. The two figures were gone now, or maybe just hidden from view. The man in the corner booth took a slow sip of water. He noticed the waitress glance toward the door, then quickly look away. Years of leading companies and reading people had sharpened his instincts. Something about the air felt off, like a room holding its breath. The older couple finished their food and stood up. They paid at the register, wished the waitress a good night, and stepped outside. The bell rang again, and then the diner felt quieter than before. Too quiet. The truck driver yawned and asked for the check. She brought it to him, smiling out of habit. He paid in cash, nodded, and left. Now there were only two people inside the diner. The waitress and the man in the corner booth. She began stacking clean plates behind the counter. This was usually her favorite part of the shift. When the rush was over. When the noise faded. When she could almost imagine the diner belonged to her alone. The bell above the door rang again, sharper this time. She looked up. Two men walked in quickly. Their clothes were dark, their steps fast and heavy. They didn't look around for a table. They didn't glance at the menu. One of them locked the door behind him. Her heart skipped. She had worked long enough to know when something was wrong. The way their shoulders were tense. The way their eyes scanned the room. The way one of them kept his hand hidden inside his jacket. The man in the corner booth felt it too. He slowly set his glass down, careful not to make a sound. His face remained calm, but his mind moved fast. He had been in dangerous situations before, though never in a place this small, this ordinary. The waitress's hands trembled slightly, but she forced herself to breathe. Panic never helped. She had learned that early in life. She kept her voice steady and asked, "Can I help you?" One of the men smirked. The other didn't answer. He stepped closer to the counter, his eyes cold and impatient. She noticed then that the man in the booth shifted just a little, positioning himself so he could see both the door and the counter. Their eyes met for a brief second. No words passed between them, but something did. Awareness, understanding, fear held tightly in check. Outside, the road remained quiet. No sirens, no passing cars. The diner, which had always felt safe in its worn and familiar way, suddenly felt very small. The waitress felt her pulse in her ears. She thought about the kitchen behind her, the narrow hallway, the back door that sometimes stuck when it rained. She thought about the training videos she barely paid attention to, about staying calm, about not being a hero. But as she looked at the man in the corner booth, sitting alone and exposed, she felt something else rise above the fear, a sense that this night was about to change everything. She had no idea who he really was, no idea how important he was to the world outside this diner. To her, he was just a quiet customer who had said thank you. And for reasons she couldn't fully explain, she knew she couldn't just stand still. Not tonight. The silence inside the diner felt thick and heavy, like the air before a storm. The two men stood near the counter, blocking the way out. One kept his hand inside his jacket, not showing what he held, but making it clear enough. The other scanned the room again, even though there were only two people inside. The waitress swallowed and rested her hands on the counter so they would not shake too much. She had learned how fear could show through the smallest movements. She kept her face calm, even forced a small, polite smile. Years of dealing with difficult customers had taught her how to hide her feelings when she needed to. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice quiet but steady. The man closest to her leaned forward. "Cash," he said. "Now." She nodded slowly. "Okay." She turned toward the register, opening it carefully. The sound of the drawer sliding out felt too loud in the quiet room. Her thoughts raced, but her body moved on habit. She took the bills out and placed them on the counter. It wasn't much. Late nights never were. The man frowned when he saw the small amount. His eyes shifted past her, landing on the man in the corner booth. "You," he said sharply. "Stand up." The man in the booth did not move right away. He lifted his hands slowly where they could be seen. His movements were calm, controlled. He stood up from the booth, careful not to make any sudden gestures. "I don't want trouble," he said evenly. "Empty your pockets," the other man snapped. The waitress felt a tight knot form in her chest. She watched as the quiet customer reached into his jacket and placed his wallet and phone on the table. They looked ordinary. Nothing about them suggested wealth or importance. Still, the robbers sensed something about him. The man near the door walked closer, circling him slowly like a hunter sizing up prey. "You look too calm," he said. "People like you usually hide more." The waitress noticed the man's jaw tighten slightly, just for a moment. Then his face relaxed again. "I'm just tired," he replied. The robber didn't seem convinced. He grabbed the wallet and flipped it open. Inside were cards that meant nothing to him. No flashy logos. No obvious signs. "Where's the rest?" he demanded. "There is no rest," the man said. The tension in the room grew sharper. The waitress could feel it pressing against her chest, making it hard to breathe. She glanced toward the kitchen without turning her head fully. The hallway was dark. The back door was there, just a few steps away, but reaching it would be impossible without drawing attention. Her mind worked quickly. She remembered something important. The camera above the counter had been broken for weeks. The owner kept saying it would be fixed soon. That meant no one was watching this moment. No one would come unless someone made noise or escaped. One of the men suddenly shoved the man from the booth back against the table. Plates rattled. The sound made the waitress flinch. "Don't lie to me," the robber said, his voice rising. "That's enough," the waitress said before she could stop herself. Both men turned to look at her. For a split second, she regretted speaking. But she didn't back down. She met their eyes one at a time, You got what you came for, she said. There's nothing else here. The man closest to her laughed quietly. You're brave, he said. Or stupid. She didn't answer. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought they might hear it. The robber near the man in the booth raised his arm suddenly. The waitress reacted without thinking. She grabbed a metal coffee pot from behind the counter and slammed it onto the counter hard. The loud crash echoed through the diner. Hey! She shouted. Someone will hear that. It was a risk. A big one. The men froze for a moment, startled by the sudden noise. That moment was short, but it was enough. The man from the booth stepped back, using the table as a shield between himself and the robber. Let's go, one of the men muttered. This place isn't worth it. The other hesitated, eyes flicking between the waitress and the man. Then, with a sharp curse, he backed toward the door. They unlocked it quickly and slipped out into the night. The bell rang again, loud and wrong, as the door slammed shut behind them. For a second, no one moved. The waitress's knees felt weak. She leaned against the counter, gripping the edge until the room stopped spinning. Her hands were shaking now, and she didn't try to hide it anymore. The man stood still near the booth, listening. After a few long seconds, he exhaled slowly. They're gone, he said. She nodded, unable to speak right away. He stepped closer to the counter but kept a respectful distance. You didn't have to do that, he said quietly. She finally found her voice. Yes, I did. They stood there in the dim diner, surrounded by half-empty plates and spilled coffee. The danger had passed, but the fear still lingered in the air. Sirens sounded faintly in the distance. Someone must have called them. Maybe the older couple. Maybe the truck driver. The waitress pressed her palms together, trying to steady herself. She realized how close everything had come to going wrong. One bad move. One wrong second. The man looked at her with something she didn't expect. Not pity. Not shock. Respect. Thank you, he said. She nodded again, brushing it off like it was nothing. Just doing my job. But both of them knew that wasn't true. Outside, red and blue lights began to reflect faintly off the diner windows. And somewhere deep inside, the waitress felt a quiet certainty settle in her chest. This night was far from over. It had only just begun. The flashing lights outside grew brighter, washing the diner windows in red and blue. The sound of sirens faded as the police cars came to a stop. The waitress straightened up, wiping her hands on her apron even though they were already clean. Her heart was still racing, but the danger had passed. Officers entered carefully, asking questions, checking corners, making sure the two men were truly gone. The waitress answered what she could. Her voice shook at first, then steadied as she spoke. She explained how the men came in, what they demanded, how they left. She did not make herself sound brave. She simply told the truth. The man from the booth spoke next. He kept his answers short and clear. He did not give more than necessary. The officers listened, nodding, writing things down. One of them glanced at him with mild curiosity, then moved on. After a while, the tension eased. One officer told them they could lock up early if they wanted. Another said someone would follow up later. The lights outside dimmed as the cars pulled away, leaving the road quiet again. The diner felt different now. The familiar walls and booths seemed smaller, like they had witnessed something private and dangerous and would never forget it. The waitress locked the door and flipped the sign to closed. Her legs felt heavy as she leaned against the counter. Only then did the weight of the night settle fully on her shoulders. You should sit, the man said gently. She nodded and slid into the booth across from him. The vinyl seat squeaked under her weight. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. I didn't mean to scare you, she finally said. He shook his head. You didn't. You helped. She let out a small breath. I've never been in anything like that before. Neither have most people, he said. You handled it well. She looked down at her hands. There was a faint red mark where she had gripped the counter too hard. I just reacted. Sometimes that's enough, he replied. She studied his face more closely now. The calm she noticed earlier was still there, but there was something else beneath it. A kind of careful distance. As if he was used to watching situations unfold without stepping fully into them. "Do you live around here?" she asked. "No," he said. "I'm passing through. Business." Yes. That was all he offered, and she didn't push. People came through the diner every day with stories they never shared. She respected that. She stood up and began cleaning again, needing something to do. He offered to help, stacking plates and wiping tables. It felt strange, but also normal, like the diner had pulled them both back into its usual rhythm. As they worked, she told him small things. How late nights paid a little extra. How the owner trusted her to close up alone. How she liked the quiet hours best. He listened without interrupting, as if each detail mattered. When the place was finally clean, she grabbed her jacket. The clock showed it was much later than she realized. "Are you okay to get home?" he asked. She nodded. "I live close." He hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. "If you need anything," he said, offering it to her, "you can call." She paused, surprised, then took the phone and typed in her number. She handed it back with a small smile. "Same goes for you." They stepped outside together. The night air felt cooler now, calmer. The road was empty again, like nothing had happened. Before leaving, he stopped and looked back at the diner. "You changed the outcome tonight," he said quietly. She shrugged. "I just didn't want anyone to get hurt." He nodded once, as if that answer meant more than she knew. Then he walked toward his car and drove away. She stood there for a moment watching the taillights disappear. Then she locked the door behind her and headed home. Sleep did not come easily that night. Every sound made her sit up. Every shadow felt too close. She replayed the moment over and over in her mind, wondering what could have gone wrong. Wondering why she had stepped in instead of freezing like she always feared she would. When morning finally came, she felt drained but strangely calm. She dressed for work, tied her hair back, and returned to the diner like she always did. Life, she told herself, had to go on. The breakfast rush was steady. Regulars filled the booths. Coffee poured. Orders called out. The night before began to feel like a bad dream. Then, just before noon, the sound of engines outside cut through the chatter. One by one, large dark vehicles rolled into the parking lot. 4 of them. Clean. Expensive. Out of place. People inside the diner went quiet. Forks paused midair. Someone whispered, "What's going on?" The waitress felt her stomach drop. The vehicles stopped in a neat line. Doors opened. Men in dark suits stepped out, scanning the area before standing aside. And then she saw him. He stepped out slowly, wearing a different jacket now, but the same calm expression. He looked around once, then met her eyes through the window. Her breath caught. The bell above the door rang as he entered the diner. Everything was about to change. The diner went quiet in a way that felt heavier than the night before. Even the grill seemed to hiss more softly, as if it knew something important was happening. The waitress stood behind the counter, her hands resting on the edge, unsure whether to move or stay still. The man who walked in did not rush. He took a moment to look around, just as he had the night before. The booths were filled now. People watched him with curiosity, their eyes moving from his face to the men waiting outside, then back again. No one spoke. He stepped closer to the counter. "Good morning," he said. His voice was calm, familiar. That alone made her heart beat faster. "Good morning," she replied, keeping her tone steady. One of the men from outside entered next. He wore an earpiece and stood near the door, watching quietly. Another remained by the vehicles. The message was clear without being loud. The man at the counter glanced around once more, then spoke. "I'd like to sit where I did last night, if that's okay." She nodded. "Of course." He walked to the corner booth and sat down. The same spot, the same seat. It felt like time had folded in on itself. She poured him a coffee without asking. Her hands moved on instinct. She brought it over and placed it in front of him. "Thank you," he said, meeting her eyes. She gave a small nod and returned to the counter. The room slowly filled with quiet whispers. Someone near the window leaned forward, trying to listen. Another customer pulled out a phone but thought better of it and put it away. After a moment, the man stood up again. "I'm sorry to interrupt everyone," he said, his voice carrying without effort. "I won't take much of your time." All eyes turned toward him. "My life was saved in this diner last night," he continued, "by someone who didn't know who I was. Someone who acted out of courage, not for reward." The waitress felt her face grow warm. She stared at the counter, wishing she could disappear behind it. "That kind of courage is rare," he said, "and it deserves to be recognized." He turned toward her. "I came back today to say thank you," he said. "Properly." The room stayed silent. She stepped out from behind the counter, unsure what else to do. "You don't have to do this," she said quietly. "I do," he replied. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small card. He placed it on the table near her. "This is my office," he said, "and this is who I am." She looked down at the card. The name meant nothing to her at first. Then she noticed the company logo beneath it. Her breath caught. She had seen that logo on the news, on buildings in big cities, on stories about business deals that felt far removed from her life. She looked back up at him, stunned. "I didn't know," she said. "I know," he replied gently. "That's why it mattered." He turned back to the room. "I don't believe kindness should stay invisible," he said. "And I don't believe help should only flow one way." He faced her again. "I want to help you the way you helped me." Her chest tightened. "I don't need anything," she said quickly. "I just did what felt right." He nodded. "That's exactly why I'm here." He didn't pull out a check. He didn't make a big show. Instead, he spoke calmly, carefully. "I learned last night that you work long hours," he said. "That you close this place alone. That you carry more weight than most people ever notice." She swallowed hard. "I also learned that you have goals," he continued. "Things you want to do but haven't had the chance to start." She stared at him, unsure how he knew that. Then she remembered the small things she had shared while cleaning. Words she thought would fade into the air. "I don't want to hand you something and walk away," he said. "I want to open a door. What you choose to do with it is up to you." He slid another paper across the table. It was simple, a single page. "This is a scholarship," he said, "for training or education. Any field you choose. No strings." Her hands shook as she picked it up. "And this," he added, placing a second envelope down, "is for your safety, so you don't have to close alone again if you don't want to." Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. "I didn't save you for this," she said softly. "I know," he said. "That's why it's not a payment. It's a thank you." The room stayed quiet. Some people wiped their eyes. Others nodded slowly, as if understanding something deeper than money. The diner owner, who had arrived during the rush, stepped forward. "You're welcome here any time," he said, his voice thick. The man smiled. "I'd like that." He turned back to the waitress. "One more thing," he said. She looked up. "I don't want this moment to define you," he said. "Let it support you. Let it help you grow. But don't let it cage you." She nodded, unable to speak. He stepped back, giving her space. "I'll leave you to your day," he said. As he walked toward the door, the room seemed to breathe again. The bell rang softly when he stepped outside. She watched through the window as he spoke briefly to the men waiting. The doors of the vehicles closed. Engines started. The SUVs pulled away, one by one, until the parking lot was empty again. The diner slowly returned to its usual sound. Plates clinked. Coffee poured. Conversations resumed. But nothing felt the same. The waitress stood there, holding the papers in her hands, feeling something new settle inside her. Not relief, possibility, and she knew the hardest part was still ahead. The rest of the day passed in a blur. The waitress moved through her shift as if she were watching herself from a distance. She smiled when customers spoke to her, refilled cups, took orders and wiped tables, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the papers folded carefully in her apron pocket. Every now and then, she touched the pocket just to be sure they were still there. They felt real, heavy, not with money, but with meaning. When her shift finally ended, she stayed behind to help clean. The diner owner tried to send her home early, but she shook her head. Routine helped her breathe. Normal work made the world feel steady again. That night, she sat alone at her small kitchen table. The room was quiet except for the ticking of a clock. She spread the papers out in front of her and read them slowly. Every word was clear. There were no tricks hidden between the lines. No pressure. Just opportunity. She leaned back in her chair and stared at the ceiling. For years, her life had been a straight line. Work, sleep, repeat. Not bad, not terrible. Just small. Predictable. Safe. Now that line had cracked open. She thought about what she really wanted. Not what sounded impressive. Not what would please anyone else. What she wanted. The answer surprised her. The next morning, she made a phone call. Her voice shook at first, then grew stronger. She asked questions. She listened. She took notes on a scrap of paper. Over the next few weeks, changes came quietly. She adjusted her schedule at the diner, no longer closing alone. The owner hired an extra hand, using part of the support that had been offered. The diner felt safer, brighter, like it had been given a second chance too. She began training during the day. Nothing flashy, nothing rushed, just steady learning. The kind that builds confidence slowly, piece by piece. The man who had returned in the SUVs checked in once, threw a short message. Not to control, not to guide, just to ask how she was doing. She replied with a simple thank you. That was enough. Months passed. The diner remained her anchor, but it no longer felt like a cage. It felt like a place she chose, not a place she was trapped. Customers noticed the change in her. She smiled more easily. She stood a little taller. When people asked what had happened, she didn't tell the whole story. She just said she'd had a reminder that good things could still happen. One evening, long after the rush had ended, she sat in the corner booth alone. The same booth where everything had changed. She watched the door. The bell rang as a couple walked in, laughing. She brought them menus and coffee. Life moved on, simple and honest. She thought about the night of the robbery. The fear. The choice. The moment she could have stayed silent but didn't. She understood something now that she hadn't before. Bravery wasn't loud. It didn't always look like standing tall or fighting back. Sometimes it looked like speaking up. Making noise when silence felt easier. Caring when walking away would have been safer. The road outside the diner stayed quiet. No SUVs returned. No cameras. No headlines. And that was okay. Because the real change had already happened. Inside her. One afternoon, a young waitress started her first shift. Nervous. Unsure. Dropping a spoon and apologizing too much. She smiled and helped her. Showed her where things were kept. Told her it was okay to make mistakes. Trust yourself, she said. The words surprised her as they left her mouth. But they were true. Late that night, after closing, she locked the door and stood for a moment, listening to the silence. The same silence that once felt dangerous now felt peaceful. She turned off the lights one by one. Outside, the diner sign glowed softly against the dark road. She took a deep breath and walked to her car, knowing she was no longer waiting for life to happen to her. She was meeting it. And it all started on a quiet night, in a small diner, when she chose to care. Not because she expected anything in return, but because it was the right thing to do.